Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a seriously spooky explainer. We are going to objectively break down a notorious urban legend straight out of Mumbai, exactly as it was reported by the popular channel Cooney Monday. But as we walk through this pretty chilling narrative, we're also going to look at it through a very specific lens. We want to figure out, why exactly do ghost stories scare us so much? Like, what psychological triggers are they actually pulling? All right, let's just dive right in. So what exactly happens at 2 a.m. in this Mumbai college? Just hearing that question instantly sparks our curiosity, doesn't it? It taps right into our primal fear of the unknown. Now, SNDT is a very well-known, totally normal girls' college in Juhu, Mumbai. But local folklore claims that something absolutely terrifying awakens in the dead of night, specifically at 2 a.m. And the dark hours of the early morning have always been a staple of horror, mostly because they represent a time when we humans feel the most vulnerable and the most isolated. So let's get into part one, the secret of SNDT College. This is where we establish the foundation of the legend. What's really fascinating here is the duality you find in so many great ghost stories. On one hand, you got the new campus buildings. They're safe, functional, and super active with students during the day. But then, right nearby, you have the old building, which is ruined, totally abandoned, and basically the epicenter of our entire legend. Ghost stories scare us because they subvert familiar safe spaces. When a place of learning decays into an absolute ruin, it essentially becomes a blank canvas for all our deepest anxieties. Let's meet the guys who actually lived this. First up is Rohan. He's a 20-year-old skeptic who openly mocks ghost stories. When a female student tells him about the haunting, he literally laughs it off. Then there's Vishal, his best friend, who basically gets dragged into this whole late-night adventure. Rohan's skepticism is such a classic catalyst in these kinds of narratives. We subconsciously fear for the skeptic, right? Because we know their arrogance usually invites the exact horror they're denying. Moving right along to Section 2, the Midnight Challenge. Let's look at the inciting incident that kicked this all off. Their timeline really paints a picture of a journey straight into the unknown. At exactly 1:30 a.m., armed with nothing but flashlights, they sneak in through the back gate. They navigate their way through all this dense overgrowth, heading toward the old lecture halls. This maps out their physical journey, sure, but it's also a psychological one. They are moving further and further away from safety, deeper into isolation, and totally leaving the rational world behind. Which brings us to the threshold for Section 3, entering the old building, where the atmosphere massively shifts. The crucial point here is how the environment instantly attacks the senses. The source highlights walls completely swallowed by overgrown bushes, thick spiderwebs everywhere, heavy doors screaming on rusted hinges, and a silence so profound the boys could literally hear their own heartbeats. Vishal was terrified just experiencing the vibe of the place. And why does this scare us so much? Well, sensory deprivation mixed with visible signs of decay signals to our primitive brains that we are in a hostile, highly unpredictable environment. The escalation here is just fascinating. Step 1, an unnatural, freezer-like cold hits them right outside a specific classroom. Step 2, they walk in to find a super dilapidated room, just broken chairs and a lonely old blackboard. And then, Step 3, an auditory hallucination. Out of nowhere, they hear a woman's voice reciting multiplication tables. The core horror here lies in the juxtaposition. It's a totally normal, everyday school activity happening in a dead, empty space. It starts off super quietly. 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. It sounds exactly like a strict school teacher. The cognitive dissonance is really what makes this so incredibly effective. A classroom is inherently a place of order and rules, right? But hearing this phantom voice enforces a terrifying realization that the normal rules of reality just don't apply here anymore. Then, suddenly, the volume and tone shift violently. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. The voice becomes increasingly angry and aggressive. The phantom teacher is clearly losing her temper, and the dead silence of that decaying room is completely shattered. Experiencing a sudden lack of control over your environment is a massive trigger for human fear. The haunting then erupts into absolute chaos. That angry recitation is followed by the sudden, sharp, echoing crack of a slap, which instantly transitions into the horrific sound of multiple children crying loudly, all at once. Even Rohan, the staunch skeptic who laughed this off earlier, is frozen in place. This directly taps into our deep-seated distress at hearing suffering children. It's literally weaponizing our own empathy to create terror. As they flash their lights around the completely empty room, chalk begins to move across the old blackboard entirely on its own. It writes out this exact threat. I was killed here, and now I want my revenge. The core of so many enduring ghost stories is a past injustice that just refuses to stay buried. This literal promise of vengeance is what finally breaks their nerve, sending both boys fleeing in sheer, absolute panic. Let's move to the climax of our explainer, Section 4, Terror of the Ghost Teacher. So Rohan sprints out of the classroom and manages to make it to the exterior courtyard. But when he turns around to check on his friend, Vishal isn't there. Where did Vishal go? This sudden, inexplicable disappearance taps into one of our most primal human fears, separation anxiety. Being isolated in a dangerous situation without your trusted companion amplifies the terror tenfold. To make matters even worse, a sudden thunderstorm rolls in. Through the heavy rain and these bright flashes of lightning, Rohan looks up and sees a truly desperate visual. Vishal is up on the first floor, crying and frantically banging on a window that absolutely refuses to open. He is completely trapped inside. Rohan knows he can't just abandon his best friend, so he forces himself to go back into the dark, ruined building. As he's frantically searching the first-floor corridors, the silence is broken again by that booming, angry voice. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 4 is 8. The voice acts as a terrifying sort of beacon, guiding Rohan right back to the very classroom they had just fled from. When Rohan finally reaches the doorway, he finds Vishal sitting on the floor, weeping and hypnotically repeating the math tables back to a horrifying entity. And the entity manifesting before them is pure nightmare fuel. She's wearing a dust-covered black sari, has wild, scattered hair, and is grasping a wooden stick. But it's her face, swollen, rotting flesh with pure, pupilless white eyes. This taps incredibly heavily into the uncanny valley, where something looks somewhat human but is grotesquely distorted, which triggers an intense biological revulsion in us. Now, let's explore how they actually got out of there in Section 5, the aftermath of that night and surviving the legend. The entity slowly turns her attention away from Vishal and locks onto Rohan. She smiles like a total maniac and begins to approach him. Rohan's instinct for self-preservation finally takes over, and he runs. But in his blind panic, he slips on the stairs, tumbles down, and instantly loses consciousness. It is the ultimate vulnerability, being knocked completely unconscious in a place of extreme danger. Here is where things get truly fascinating. When Rohan wakes up, he's safely back in Vishal's flat. But their stories of how he got there do not match at all. Rohan remembers Vishal being the one trapped upstairs. But Vishal remembers escaping first, losing Rohan, and seeing Rohan trapped upstairs screaming in pain. It turns out Vishal had actually gone to get 2 other friends to help him rescue Rohan. This is a brilliant psychological element of the story. Extreme terror literally fracturing their memory, making us realize we can't always trust our own minds. The haunting wasn't just in their traumatized heads, though. As Vishal and his 2 friends carried an unconscious Rohan out of the building and into a waiting auto rickshaw, the source notes that all 4 boys distinctly heard the echoing multiplication tables and the sound of crying children. Having corroboration by multiple witnesses is exactly what cements a simple scary story into a deeply rooted, widely believed urban legend. So, what is the lingering impact of all this? Well, naturally, the boys never returned to the area. SNDT College remains a fully functional campus today, but the students are still acutely aware of and honestly terrified by the legend. To this day, it is said that absolutely no one dares to go near that old classroom at midnight, terrified of becoming the ghost teacher's next victim. Folklore like this functions as a communal warning system, keeping people away from perceived danger. Which brings us to the end of our explainer and leaves us with one final, pretty chilling thought. We've objectively broken down the geography, the timeline, the conflicting memories, and the intense psychological triggers of this local myth. But even knowing all of this, knowing exactly why our minds react with such primal fear to these tropes, would you dare to enter that old building at 2 a.m.? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating legend with me today, and always keep questioning the stories that scare us.